In our religious life, we know that the words we use actually shape our belief and our faith. We Episcopalians care deeply about the words we use not only in our worship, but also more broadly in talking about God and our relationship with God. We're especially fond of the prayers that week by week, season by season, year by year, seep into every fiber of our soul. We know that they voice our brokenness, our fears, our hopes, and our joys. We have a term for this, in Latin, of course, so that we can sound extra smart and a little bit smug. Lex orandi, lex credendi. It literally translates, the law of prayer is the law of belief. Or, to put it more simply, in the words of one of the great Episcopal liturgical scholars of the 20th century, praying shapes believing. Among these belief-shaping words in our liturgical and theological language, we have some that we use only in the context of our worship life, of our religious life. Words like sacrament, or episcopate, or lectionary give us a sort of insider's language that might as well be a foreign tongue to others. We also use words that non-Christians would know, but they would quite possibly have a different understanding of their meaning. Words like spirituality, or prayer, or salvation. We often teach about these terms because our shared understanding and use is really important to our shared life of worship and service. I have a favorite word like this, one that we quite consciously use differently from its common definition and understanding: joy. I love to talk about joy. It's a word that shows up frequently in our scriptures and in our liturgies. It's one of the most important words of the collect of the day today. If you look it up in the dictionary, you know what it will offer as the most common synonym, right? Happiness. And that's a fine synonym in general, but it's not really what we mean when we talk about joy as part of our faith. When we talk about joy, we are specifically referring to an experience of God. C.S. Lewis wrote a book about his early life and his reluctant journey from convinced atheist to convicted believer. He titled it Surprised by Joy. In it, he describes what he comes to understand as experiences of joy in his life. He describes joy like this: it was a sensation, of course, of desire, but desire for what? Before I knew what I desired, the desire itself was gone, the whole glimpse withdrawn, the world turned commonplace again, or only stirred by a longing for the longing that had just ceased. In a sense, the central story of my life is about nothing else. The quality is that of an unsatisfied desire which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction. I call it joy, which is here a technical term and must be sharply distinguished both from happiness and pleasure. Joy, in this sense, has indeed one characteristic and one only in common with them: the fact that anyone who has experienced it will want it again. I doubt whether anyone who has tasted joy would ever, if both were in their power, exchange it for all the pleasures in the world. But then, joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is. In other words, joy as we Christians understand it is only an experience and gift from God. Joy is what we feel when we sense God being present with us, when we sense God holding us up, when we sense God's healing balm on our hurts. We can't control it, we can't manufacture it, we can't hold on to it. As Lewis puts it, all joy reminds. It is never a possession, always a desire for something longer ago or further away or still about to be. When we know joy, this sweet longing for that healing, sustaining presence of God, we long for nothing but that longing. And if you pay any attention to the lives of the saints who show us the way and who have known joy beyond what we could even imagine, we know that joy comes from following God's ways, responding to God's call, sharing God's love, whatever the cost, without regard to our own safety or standing or success in the world. This Lent, I have invited us each week to take up, to reflect on, to ruminate over, to luxuriate in a simple but profound verse from the psalm appointed for the day. I've reminded us each week that the Psalms give expression to every possible facet of human experience. Today, on our fifth and final Lenten Sunday, it's the final verse of our psalm passage for today, Psalm 51, verse 13, that is our gift to receive with gratitude. It says, "Give me the joy of your saving help again, and sustain me with your bountiful Spirit." Give me the joy of your saving help again, and sustain me with your bountiful Spirit. Give me the joy of your saving help again, and sustain me with your bountiful Spirit. The psalmist knows the source, the only source of joy, God's saving help, God's loving presence. This makes joy the perfect subject of our final Lenten Sunday, doesn't it? Too often we approach Lent with its penitence and solemnity as a time to embrace our guilt, to feel miserable about our misery, as a way perhaps to gain some special favor from God or to save us from ourselves. We all too easily miss the fact that when we take our Lenten journey in its fullness as a time to look deeply within, we can cultivate our deep longing for God's saving help rather than wallow in shame or guilt. When we approach Lent this way, the way we're supposed to, we discover that our Lenten disciplines of self-examination and repentance, of prayer, fasting, and self-denial, and reading and meditating on God's holy word actually lead us into pure joy and lift us out of our distress, whatever the source of that distress might be. Our Lenten journey properly leads us to joy and sustains us in God's Spirit. If we think that the point of Lent is to feel the harsh discipline we might receive from a stern parent or teacher or coach, we are imposing some worldly misfortune onto our faith life. No, Lenten discipline might be challenging, but those disciplines lead us to call on God's saving help. When we come to lean solely on God's saving help and not on our own will or wit, we see that we have absolutely nothing to fear. We come to long to be fully the person God created us to be. We come to long to be fully present to God, who is fully, bountifully present to us. And for God's saving us time and again, for Jesus' journey to the cross, the ultimate example of God's saving help, for our responding by giving of ourselves with joy, for God's life-giving love for us and constantly, relentlessly offering us the joy of saving help. With our whole heart and body, soul and mind, we give thanks.